Good morning, table family. How many would agree it's time to be free? Freedom is something we talk about, but it's not always easy to live out. You know what I'm saying? Solomon Northup was born in 1808. He was a skilled carpenter, played the violin, was a beautiful violinist. He was married to his wife, Anne. They had 3 beautiful children. They lived in Saratoga Springs, New York. In 1841, tragically, Solomon was kidnapped. Because as you remember your history, slavery wasn't abolished until 1865. So even though he was living as a free man in New York, slavery was still going. He was captured by 2 men and taken to Louisiana, given a new name, and beaten every time he mentioned that he was a free man. But Solomon never gave up hope for being free. He wanted to see his wife Anne again. He wanted to see his children. And eventually, when a man named Samuel Bass came to do work on his plantation, he convinced him to secretly carry a letter that would tell his family that he was still alive and living in Louisiana. That letter made it all the way back to New York. And when his family and friends received it, they drove down to rescue him from the plantation owner. Solomon's memoir was published in 1853, but many of you might remember his story came to the big screen in 2013 in the movie 12 Years a Slave, because he lived in Louisiana for 12 years before he was rescued. I think for me, the sin of slavery was depicted in this movie in ways I had never seen before, but it also reminded me that no matter how hopeless a situation can seem, the desire for freedom is greater, right? And while we often think of slavery as an institution of the past, I did some research this week. Do you know the Borgen Project reported that worldwide there are still 29 million people enslaved around the world in some type of sex trafficking, in some type of, what we would call slavery, that they are not being paid for their work. That's like filling the city of Seattle 10 times with people around the world. I don't know about you, but that breaks my heart. And I pray as people of God, our hearts would be broken for the things that break the heart of God. Amen. I mean, the heart of God breaks when people are not free. You know, from the Garden of Eden, think about it. Freedom was God's idea. He could have created us like robots, right? But he created us with a free will. I don't know, but nobody made you come to church this morning, right? You got up and you said, what am I going to do? It's Sunday. It's cold out there. I don't know. Should I go see a movie? All the movies don't start till later. Maybe I should go to church, right? We have the freedom. And, God wants us to live free, but we take a lot of freedoms that we have in this country for granted, don't we? If you think about it, we have the freedom to vote and elect our own leaders. We have the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom to worship, right? You know, today, around the world, there are countries where people have to hide, right? People have to hide in home churches, underground churches to worship God, but we have freedom. And here's the reality. All of us need freedom from something, right? It might not be physical form of slavery, thank God, but, all of us deal with some type of addictions, right? Whether it's an approval addiction. Anybody struggling with me need some AA for some approval addiction, right? Negative thought patterns. Maybe it's a chemical dependency. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's alcohol. I don't know. But we all got our issues, right? Can we be honest? We're in church. We can be honest, right? Some of us, we get stuck in cycles of pain, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain that we're struggling with, relational pain. Sometimes we just get stuck in the past. Let's be honest. Some people, we just get stuck in our past failures, maybe even our past success, right? and it's hard to move forward. If I were to sit down with each of you and ask you this question, what do you need freedom from? What would you say? But even more importantly, what do you need freedom to do in your life? See, we often think we need freedom from something, but God wants to free us up to do some good things, right? It goes both ways. I don't know if you ever had a pet, any pet people in here? I have a pet because my kids wanted another brother or sister, and I said, how about a dog? And so I said, here's the deal. If I get you a puppy, you cannot ask me for a brother or sister. They said, we promise, so we got a dog. The dog is 14 years old. My kids have grown up, and guess who's stuck with the dog? That would be me. But when I was a kid, I remember wanting a hamster. They had these little teddy bear hamsters, and I begged for a hamster. I earned money from babysitting, and I bought a hamster. But here's the thing about hamsters. They can get on those wheels, you know, and they can be just running and running and running, but they're not going anywhere. Some of us in life, we're not free because we're just kind of going through the same old, same old, same old. But this is the year that God is calling us to live different. Say, it's time to live different. It's time to live different. There's a woman in the Bible who can teach us a few things about freedom. We don't even know her name, but she was stuck in a cycle of pain for well over a decade. I want to read the story to you. Mark 5:24. Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. Can you imagine the crowds following Jesus? Hey, if there was a guy I knew who could heal me, I think I'd be crowding around to see if I could get a glimpse. A woman in the crowd suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone from him, so he turned around in the crowd and he asked, who touched my robe? His disciples said to him, look at this crowd around here, around you. How can you ask who touched me? They were probably thinking, lots of people are touching. Everybody's bumping up and elbowing. You ever been in a crowd like that, right? I remember going to Rockefeller Center, seeing the lighting in New York once. It was shoulder-to-shoulder people. Everybody was touching everybody. That's that kind of moment. But he kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, and catch what he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Solomon and this woman had a few things in common. They both suffered for 12 years. He suffered the sin of slavery. She suffered physically in her body. They both had to fight to escape the pain that they were in. He had to go for 12 years and not give up hope. She had to press through a crowd. And they both experienced freedom. So we want to continue the conversation of what it takes to be truly free. Because I don't know about you, I want this year to be different. And if this year is going to be different, we talked last week about living by faith. We talked about living with priority. But if we truly want this year to be different, we're going to have to learn how to live free. And I want to welcome to the table Joseph and Arianna Gomez de la Mora. Say hola to our good friends. Oh, my goodness. So here's my question. This is a Spanish question. So I know if I'm just talking to you, I say, hola, amiga, hola, amigo. What if I'm saying hola to both of you?
Amigos.
Amigos. Okay, now I know.
There
Now
go.
you know.
It's a neutral one.
Now you know. It's the neutral one. Okay. So what would you like to be free of? If you could be free of anything.
Like anything?
Like
anything.
bills, you know?
That's real.
How about my mortgage? Could I just be free from my mortgage?
That sounds great.
Hello.
Talk about free.
I'm going to give like the most Garfield answer, but like Monday mornings for sure.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Like, if I could be free of that.
Mondays are tough.
Hey,
Mondays
that's
are
fair.
tough.
Yeah, waiting in lines,
Oh
you
my
know,
goodness.
technology not working, like just so many things.
All of
from
it.
mosquitoes, the rain.
Yeah, what's the purpose of mosquitoes? I haven't figured that one out.
Can
yet.
ask that one to God. in
Yeah,
heaven.
yeah. There are a lot of things we want to be free from.
True.
But Joseph, start us out. What can we learn about freedom from this woman who we don't even know her name, but she kind of had to fight through the crowd to get a hold of her freedom?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we can learn about like this woman's situation. But the first thing that really grabs me is just like relatability.
Yeah.
Like it talks about how she's experiencing like all of this pain and like all of the things that she was doing to try to get rid of it, right?
Right.
So for me, I'm just like, yeah, dude, I'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah,
Like, I
she was
probably
desperate.
right. I wouldn't have spared any expense. I would have
Yeah.
consulted as many people as I could to solve my issue. You know, like
Yeah.
this woman wanted freedom. I would have wanted freedom, and I think the world wants freedom, right? And if you look at the world and just like the history of the cultures all around the world, you'll see it too.
Yeah.
People all around the world want freedom.
That's right.
And freedom is regarded as such a valuable thing that people even fight to the death for it. That's how much we as
Yeah.
people value freedom.
Yeah.
Humans want freedom from anything that would hold them back, and I think without knowing that, without knowing it, they want freedom to live out their like God-given dreams.
That's right.
Like their God-given
right.
purpose. They don't. Maybe they don't even know how to admit it, but they know that it's there, right? They
Right,
know that
so
there is
true.
a purpose, and they want the freedom to pursue it. Our desire for freedom, I think, is really at the heart of what God created us for.
good.
And what strikes me about this woman's situation is just how difficult it was, right? Like, it was an impossible situation. Verse 26 says, she had suffered a great deal from many doctors,
Yeah.
and over the years, she had spent everything she had to pay. She had to pay them.
Yeah.
But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse.
Yeah.
She desired freedom, but nobody could help her.
Yeah.
The people that were supposed to offer help just took her money and left her in the same
Yeah.
situation.
Frustrating.
And the crazy thing is that it was continual. Like, can we take a minute to consider 12 years? 12 years is a really long time.
Yeah. Like if I have a cold for 2 days, I'm like, okay, Lord, I can't handle it. Like,
Yeah.
Seriously.
take me now, right?
Yeah, no, right.
12 years.
Yeah, like
is-
12 years
yeah.
ago was 2011.
Wow.
That's a long time.
It's a really
Yeah.
long
Like,
time
let me jog
ago.
your memory.
Right.
It's like, we could have had it all.
Adele.
Right? You remember that? Now you guys know I'm not on worship.
does.
But that was written 12 years ago,
Wow.
2011.
Wow.
2011.
If that
that's
doesn't
so
jog your memory,
crazy.
I don't know what will.
I don't
but-
remember what
Yeah.
happened that year.
Right. There was a lot of stuff. I was 11 years old. Can you
Oh my
believe that?
goodness.
That's crazy.
We're
Yeah.
young, yeah.
Yeah, crazy. A really long time. And like her pain was continuous throughout that span of time. It didn't stop. It was
Yeah.
continual.
Yeah.
And I think that we can even kind of like relate in that sense because there are things in our lives that are continual. Like pain can sometimes be a cycle that continues.
Yeah.
It's continuous. For some people, they have generational cycles that like just continue throughout generations. For other people, cycles of addiction just repeat themselves,
Yeah.
or financial cycles. They just continue to go on. And these cycles can often lead people to a place of desperation.
Yeah.
It could lead them to a place of hopelessness, especially when we feel like we just can't do anything about it. And this general sense of hopelessness, unfortunately, I fear is just continuing to grow even in America.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the numbers are really telling. The numbers of suicide in our country are 47,000 suicides every
Wow.
year.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I mean, I wouldn't want to generalize, but like it's likely that a lot of those suicides were caused by hopelessness.
Sure.
Right.
You
Some
know?
level. Yeah.
One American writer put it this way. He said, man can live about 40 days without food, about 3 days without water, about 8 minutes without air, but only for 1 second without hope.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope is really important.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it is.
at the core of who we are. If we have nothing to look forward to, we have no reason to continue,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like this is a complex issue, and I'm not claiming to solve it just in this one talk.
Yeah.
But I think that this woman's story just really does shed light on what can happen when you continue to fight, when you continue to fight and keep hope alive. This woman was stuck in a cycle of pain, and it shows us that power and bravery of being resilient. You know, it shows us that power. It shows us that bravery. And as readers of this, I think we have to acknowledge that. You know, like we can't just read past that.
Right.
Like, because we might read it as one sentence, but for her, that was a really long time of resilience.
Yeah.
You know, and like I'm sure that her path towards path towards healing wasn't like super smooth, right?
She never gave up.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
didn't. Her resilience brings hope, and she models for us that there is a path to freedom if we're willing to endure and if we're willing to be resilient. Yeah, I don't want to idealize this woman's faith, right? Like, I'm sure she went through a lot of different difficulties, and she probably doubted a lot of times, right? Like, at the end of the day, though, her faith did heal her.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I'm sure she faced so many situations that caused her great grief and pain on her bumpy road towards wholeness. And that's just life, right? But often in our lives, we can interpret like these bumpy roads and these obstacles and these speed bumps as roadblocks. You know, like we think like, oh, there is no path past this. You know, like I tried it, it's just too bumpy. There's no real path towards freedom. And we kind of just give up. But this woman wasn't that way. She was determined to find the path to her healing, and she wasn't going to stop until she got it. But for us, why is it that we stop? You know, why is it so easy for us to give up when we hit speed bumps in life?
Yeah.
Right, that's true. I think sometimes we just like forget to factor God into the equation. We just look at, this is how much I can do in my strength. But we forget that it's not just about what we can do, but that God can do the impossible. So when we see like us, like ourselves being trapped in cycles like you were talking about, or like maybe cycles of mental illness or addiction, we see like, man, this is how much I've tried. Like I've tried the best that I can, but we forget that God can like take us to that next level, and He is the one who actually gives freedom, you know?
That's true. I think for me, when your question is, why is it so easy to give up, right? And I think for me, I forget God's writing my story, and I sometimes put a period where God puts a comma, right? You ever read a story and there's pauses in there, and there's twists and there's turns and there's things that don't go as expected. And sometimes I have to step back and think, God is still writing my story. This is not the end, right? It's not over till God says it's over, right?
Yeah.
So remembering that and kind of keeping that perspective, no matter how bad things can look.
That's
right.
good.
Yeah. And I think you guys are totally right in that. I think that like our thoughts really do have a huge impact on and kind of just even get in the way of our freedom. I think even in the bumper video, right? He talks about all the things that get in the way. Right. And at the end of the day, it's his thoughts, because he's like, maybe I am already free. Right. Like maybe there is a path towards freedom. Right. And I do want to talk a little bit about this woman's obstacles, because she had some really weighty, like real obstacles in front of her. A woman with bleeding issues in her culture, in her societal context, would have likely struggled with a number of societal and cultural barriers and stigmas, some of which were the following. I'll read these out for you guys. Being considered unclean, which would require her to abstain from certain activities and avoid contact with certain people.
Yeah, she couldn't be married.
Yeah.
Yeah, she couldn't be married.
It's a pretty big deal in
back
that day.
then, that was pretty much a financial death sentence if you didn't have a man to take care of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then more than that, being unable to work or participate in economic activities during the time of her bleeding.
Yeah.
Which would have made it really difficult for her to support herself. Not only does she like have to be kind of exiled from her own family and from like the people in her culture, she doesn't even have a husband, and she can't really even make money.
Yeah.
And then being considered a sinner. Like, not only do you not have access to any resources, but then everybody also bags on you. They think that you're a sinner.
Yeah.
And they, a lot of their traditional beliefs held that bleeding issues were caused by sin or moral failing.
Right.
So
she
it
was
just
blamed.
They'd be like, it's your fault too.
Right,
Like on
right.
top of all
Yeah.
the things you can't do, they're like also bullying you.
Yeah, shame.
like that's probably the worst situation you could be in, right? And even still, like despite all of that, she didn't stop believing that freedom was possible. Or else why would she have run to Jesus?
Yeah.
Why else would she have done it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Because she did believe that there was another possibility, even after trying all these different things and facing all these different obstacles.
Yeah.
But why do we give up when we face obstacles?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
if we take a good look at our lives, are there like limiting beliefs
Yeah.
that are just closing us off of that path towards freedom?
I remember going on a hike one time, and went around a corner, and there was this big gate that had gone down. And I remember I was with a few friends, and I'm like, what, we can't go through there? And then I realized, so I had this perceived idea that we couldn't continue on the path, right? But then I stopped and I was like, well, wait a minute. I can go under this gate. I can hop over it. I can go around it. It was for cars, right? It was basically saying there were no signs or anything. It was kind of awkward. But I kind of had to realize in that moment that I had a perceived concept at first that, I couldn't go anymore. But what I believed was, wait a minute, I can get around this. And so sometimes I think we got to look at the reality versus our perception.
Yeah, right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think for this woman, like she said, I've tried everything and I've failed. Yet she decided to keep on exploring possibilities. Like,
so
you could have stopped, right?
Right.
But you decided to continue to explore possibilities.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I don't want to say that like one size fits all. One prayer and you're good, right? For some people that might work because prayer, there is power in prayer. But like maybe finding a path towards freedom is getting a counselor.
Yeah.
It's
a process.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Maybe getting therapy.
Yeah.
Or reaching out to a friend and being honest about your struggles.
Right.
Or maybe finding a pastor here at the table and like asking for prayer.
That's right.
Or joining community and having somebody walk with you.
That's good.
But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get at is that there is a path towards freedom. If you thought that your situation was hopeless, look at this woman's situation.
Yeah.
It could not be more hopeless than that.
Right.
And yet there was a path towards freedom.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's so important to remember, like you said, Beth, that freedom isn't always just a destination. It's a process that we're continuing to walk. It's something we pursue.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, too, when we talk about freedom, there's kind of two extremes we can go to. Sometimes we think, freedom is like something that God does not have a part in. I have to do it all by myself, and the only thing that's possible is what's in the realm of possibilities based on my capacity or my abilities, right? Or we can go to the other side and we can think, well, it's God's job to set me free. Like, there's nothing I can do about it. Like, it's all in God's hands. And the truth is, it's like a mix of the two. God is sovereign and God sees our situation and is in control. But you also, have to take that step towards freedom. And that's what this woman with the issue of blood did. She took a step towards freedom. She pushed through the crowd, through the obstacles, and she chose to believe. Even when all these doctors failed her time after time, making her condition worse, she hears about Jesus and she chooses to pursue him, I don't know what exactly she had to do to get to him. Maybe she had to, hear the gossip. This guy's coming in town that's healing people. She had to be like, where would he walk? Would he walk through the main street? Like, she was doing her information and digging around, But I think this wasn't a last-ditch effort, It's more than that. I think that she had to be vulnerable to believe that Jesus could heal her. She had to open herself up to the possibility that, hey, like, this guy can do this, And I think sometimes for us on our journey towards freedom, we sometimes have to open ourselves up, and be vulnerable for that possibility of freedom, and it can hurt because maybe things haven't worked in the past. Maybe it's hard to be vulnerable with somebody you need to talk to. Maybe it's hard to, go to counseling. Maybe that's hard to open up and it hurts, but that's your step on the path towards freedom. It's something that we pursue, right? And in her journey to freedom, she pursued Jesus. And her path was riddled with internal struggle, like, is this actually going to happen this time? It was riddled with external struggle. Like, that crowd probably didn't want her touching them either. She had to push through. She had to research. Like, maybe she was ridiculed for it, But she realized that if she wanted freedom, all of that bad stuff, all of that hard stuff, it was so worth it. Because she realized what freedom would mean. And I think some of us, in our situations, whether it's you're dealing with anxiety, whether you're dealing with like negative thought patterns, whether you're dealing with substance abuse or something like that, we can think, man, I don't even remember what it's like to be free. I don't even remember what it was before this 12 years, before this situation. Like, I don't even know what that looks like, But this woman had the faith to believe that it was possible, And it makes me remember that there is always a pursuit for freedom.
That's right.
We have to take a step towards it. And while we realize that we can't heal ourselves, it is a fight. I remember with my own struggle with, like, mental illness and, like, anxiety and depression. Like, there did come a time when I was like, I'm going to have to fight this, like, God is healing me, and, like, it's not my fault, but, like, I am going to have to take some steps towards freedom. I am going to have to, like, take control of my mind and my thoughts, And in this broken world we're living in, there can be a lot of obstacles between us and a free life, the freedom that we can find in God, whether it's the people that are around you, your circumstances that block you, or maybe your own belief system, a kind of doubt that is just, like, anchored in our lives that we can't imagine not having. There are so many things that can create these obstacles for us to freedom. And like we said, this woman encountered a literal crowd that she had to push through. Like, if I was bleeding for 12 years, I wouldn't be that strong. I don't think I could push through this crowd. So these obstacles, like we said, aren't roadblocks, but they are things we're going to have to get past and get people's support for and God's support for. So my question for you guys, our table team, is what gets in your way of living in freedom, the freedom that God has for you?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is kind of just, and I mentioned it even earlier, just like generational cycles, right? And you even mentioned it. Like there are times in my life where I'm just like, I didn't even know that there was an alternative.
Right. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah, like it's not going to be like a perfect example. It's not going to translate completely. But like even when we got married, right? Like you were a dishwasher family. And I wasn't.
Like, we use a dishwasher. His family had never used one before.
That's storage to me, you know?
Dishwash.
Yeah, and I was just like...
Got it.
Like, and I didn't even know that, like, my family's dishwasher even worked. I just thought it was...
he didn't know how to use it.
Yeah.
He was, like, scared to turn it on. He's like, I don't know how to do this. And I was like, oh, my goodness. That's interesting.
And, like, a lot of the times, even for us, like, it's just, like, I didn't know that there was an alternative. For me, it was just... It was hand washing dishes. But, like, to make it more personal, like, I didn't know that, like... I had to restrain my anger because in my family it just went rampant, right? Or something like that.
Right, that you were maybe, you didn't even know you were a slave to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You didn't even know that was like over you, controlling you. You didn't even know you need freedom.
Like, I didn't know that there was peace. Like, I didn't know that peace was accessible. You know, like, I didn't know that there was a solution to this.
That's good.
So, like, if I didn't even know that I had the problem, you know, like, of course I'm going to be, like, limited from being a free person. Free from anger, free from anxiety, free from depression, right? Like,
that's good. You know, when you talk about what gets in your way of living free, I would say I'm my own worst enemy most of the times, right? Like, I can blame it on, other people and circumstances, but really when I look at the mirror, I'm like, I can self-sabotage myself most days, right?
That's true.
And so sometimes, you know, Paul talks about even that negative self-talk in 2 Corinthians. He says, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. Amen. You know, the only thing that I need to do to let my mind, my thought life run out of control is nothing. That's the only thing I need to do is nothing. If I do nothing, it will go out of control. But I have to be intentional about in fact, somebody asked me, I was talking to a friend who's a pastor in the Midwest, and she asked me a question this week, and she goes, hey, where did that come from? And I said, well, that's a good question, because I know that's not from God.
We need to ask that question sometimes.
Right? We need those truth tellers in our lives.
Truly. Truly. And I think another interesting thing about this story, we've talked about obstacles a lot and how we need to pursue freedom, right? But we have to remember God's power too at the same time, because it's us and God working together to find freedom. And the thing about this story that I just think is so beautiful is that this woman didn't even have to speak to be healed. She just had to, like, touch Jesus. And that's just so poetic. It's just so beautiful because it's like his goodness was contagious.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, we were talking about her illness and what it meant in her society, like her being unclean, her not being able to go certain places, her not being able to marry. In fact, like, if she touched somebody else, then they would be unclean. So technically, her state was contagious, right?
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that even though that was true in their culture, like, Jesus' goodness was just so good. His power was so strong that it overpowered what was bad in her, what was wrong in her, you know?
So it was the opposite.
It was the opposite.
Right.
It went the other way, right?
I even kind of touched on it, but, like, you couldn't be around certain people, right? Like, if you had this condition, you touched a priest who was considered holy, then they would become unholy. Right? But with Jesus, it was the opposite.
That's right.
Right? Like, he touched people. He touched the uncleanliness and made it clean.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. That's so beautiful. And I think the interesting thing about it, too, is that, like, she didn't have to persuade God. You know?
Yeah.
She just had to be near him. She just had to have contact with him. And she was set free. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we have to be like, God, why aren't you, like, setting me out of this, like, circumstance? Like, why am I still in this addiction? And we, like, plead and plead and plead. And whether those are hard questions, right? Those are some unanswerable questions. But But it's not because God doesn't want to set us
That's
free.
right.
He has a
That's
purpose through our entire process, our entire journey to freedom. God has his hand in.
Yeah.
So Beth, what happens after we pursue Jesus
Yeah.
for freedom?
You know, I think it's important that we see that there's a pattern unfolding in this story that, you know, you pointed out, hey, there was a path to freedom for her. It was not an easy path, but she
Yeah.
finally found her way, and her path was to Jesus. And then you pointed out that, hey, that path, she had to pursue it. She had to take initiative. But when we look at what actually happened, we have to recognize that God made provision for her freedom.
So true.
There is a path and there is the pursuit, but God brings the provision. And, you know, if you think about it logically, it didn't really make sense. I mean, she just went through the crowd and touched him. It kind of sounds, you know, kind of a supernatural fairy tale kind of thing. But I want us to think about this. God wants to give us freedom more than we want to get it.
That's hard to believe.
God wants to give us freedom more than we want to get it. And so there's three things I want to leave us with. Do you remember, you know, when Jesus said in John 14:9, this is the reason right here that we talk about Jesus so much in church, right? This is the one sentence that Jesus said. He said, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, right? So Jesus was saying, hey, when you look at me in my life, that's how you get to know God, right? And so that's why we talk about Jesus so much, because the closer we get to Jesus, the closer we get to God, right? So there's three things we can learn about the heart of God by the actions of Jesus in this story. First of all, it says Jesus went with him. Do you realize the reasons the crowd were pushing? Because Jesus was on his way with a man named Jairus, whose daughter was dying. And if you read the rest, you know, a little spoiler alert for you if you hadn't read it, she actually did die before Jesus got there. But here's the thing. Jesus went with him, but he was not too busy to stop and talk to this woman. You know, can I just tell you, I don't know where you're at on your faith journey, but God is not too busy for you today. You know, sometimes I think we're bothering God sometimes when we talk to God. God, I know that there's a lot of problems in the world. There's wars going on and economic collapse. But God, you know, would you have time just to kind of help me with? God is never too busy. Jesus was never too busy. There were crowds going on, but Jesus was never too busy to stop and look at this woman. The second action verb, it says he turned around. Faith gets the attention of God. Faith he turned around because this woman had enough faith to say, hey, if I just reach out and touch, I'll be healed. And, you know, when we act in faith, it always gets God's attention. No matter what act of faith, no matter if it's big or small, even us getting up and coming to church is an act of faith. Us giving is an act of faith because I have to trust that God's going to provide for my needs. When I tithe every time, can I tell you it's painful? Right?
That's
just like
true.
going to the gym is painful. Let's just be real. When I tithe, when I give God the first 10% of my income, it hurts. Because I always think, well, I could do something else with that. I could, you know, we talked about travel in the world and where we want to. I could go to Hawaii with that. Joseph and I had the same place. If we could live anywhere, we're going to Hawaii.
If you chose something different, you
Yeah,
chose
I'm
wrong.
coming.
I'm
She's
sorry.
That sounds great.
we're going, honey, my husband, we're going to Hawaii. But faith got God's attention, and faith gets God's attention. So now I can trust when I give, hey, He will supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory. I don't have to worry about it. Scripture says he's never seen the righteous children begging for bread. And then the last thing he did, I love this. It says, but he kept looking around. Remember when he was like, hey, who touched me? And he was looking around. They were like, Jesus, what do you mean? Everybody's touching you. What are you, crazy? Like everybody's bumping elbows here. But he kept looking around. He was persistent.
Yeah.
He was not going to stop until he connected with the woman that connected with him. Can I tell you, Jesus is persistent and he's looking for you?
Wow.
He's looking for you because he wants our freedom even more than we want our freedom. And I'm a little bit emotional today because I received a phone call last night that I lost a cousin to suicide. So those numbers aren't just stats to me this morning.
Yeah.
That was a family member that lost hope. He didn't realize there was a path. He didn't realize he didn't have anybody to say, hey, let me help you pursue this. He didn't realize that God would provide freedom, and he gave up. How bad do you want to be free? I don't care how big or little your addiction is. Maybe you just say, you know what, I just like retail therapy. I just like to shop and spend all my extra money. Of course, I haven't given in the offering or the local impact fund, but man, just Kohl's is calling my name. In fact, I had to.
That's real. That's
I had
real.
to do a. I had to do a, or Dick's or wherever y'all shop. Nordstrom Rack is my go-to. In fact, I had to text a little confession to Kim last week. I said I was shopping. Kim and I have a thing for Nikes. When I'm not at church on the stage, I'm usually wearing my Nikes. I said, Kim, there's a sale. I found some Nikes for $35 at the rack. There's some more if you want to go get a pair. But sometimes we got little addictions. Sometimes we got big addictions. But how bad do we want it? Table team, thank you for breaking down this story. It's powerful.